This is a gorgeous July Sunday afternoon, and Everett and I have the pleasure of being invited to a picnic. This is at Bunclody, Manitoba. Ever heard of it? Well, if you stay tuned and take part in what we're going to be offering you during this picnic, you'll gain a whole lot of knowledge of what this little community was and still is all about. It was a grand era. It was the era of the Great Northern, which played a big part in what this part of our community was all about. There was a store and a school and a church all within this area that played a big part in making this community alive and well, and still carrying a lot of the memories here that we're going to have shared with us today at the Bunclody picnic. Now is of where there was a huge bridge that went over the top of the highway. And this was the main road that you had to travel into Brandon. And of course, the train went over above us. Right where I'm standing here was a huge bridge that took the train over the top of the road that led you into Brandon. And up on the top of where you're seeing right now, there would have been a huge elevator for that day, and it would have been called the McGabe elevator. And that was the hub of where you had to haul all your grain to. Keep in mind now, if you're traveling down this road back in the early 1900s, late 1800s, you're looking at a 2-day travel to get into Brandon. That would be with a team of ox, and that was your closest trading center when this area was first being settled. 2 days in and 2 days back out. Gives us a little to think about in our half-hour or maybe even hour journey that we take now to go into Brandon. And as you look down this road with us, you'll see where that car is sitting down there. That actually would have been the settlement of Bunclody. I believe that there was a store there that at that time was the main hub of that community. That when the activity on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, whatever may have been happening, where people went and skated on the river or tobogganed down these beautiful slopes here, the main gathering point after would have been right in the Bunclody store. Now keep in mind also that where we're at is only a short distance from where there was a huge trestle bridge erected that allowed the train, the Great Northern, to cross over the Souris River. Was in use for many years, and I understand when it was no longer needed that the bridge was then disassembled and the timber was returned. I believe it was out to BC, where it could be used as its purpose out there in that part of our country somewhere. Here in Bunclody. And this one is for the king and the country. It is an honor roll from the 1914, the First World War, to 1918. The names of the men that took part in that, and also the lives that were lost. And then it's also written on here in 1939 for the Second World War, the name of the men in this area that were a part of that. It was erected at Bunclody by the grateful friends and family. Down in here it also lets us know that Bunclody was named in 1884 by George McGill. And this community was named after his hometown in Ireland. Bunclody's willing workers, honoring the ladies active in the community since 1932. We have found a couple of ladies here at the picnic that have some fabulous memories to share with us. I believe they're from Souris now, but can you tell me your name?
Phyllis Clark.
Okay, and this is her sister?
Millie Edwards.
Tell me how your story begins with Bunclody, please.
Well, for me, I was born in Myrtle Cottage, and I think that's pretty unique. For it was just across from the store a little bit. So I was born right here in Bunclody.
And maybe right now we'll share this picture with you that these ladies have had done. This is a painting that was done from memories of what this community was like here. And here we see these ladies' grandparents' home and the general store that their grandparents ran. So this is part of what their lives were all about during that time. Can you tell me how your life begins down here in Bunclody?
Well, I guess this was my grandparents, I was born south of Bunclody here. But I was here pretty often.
Did you spend a lot of time down here with your grandparents then?
Yes, I started school for the first year or two.
You went to school where then?
At Bunclody.
Now, Bunclody School wasn't right down here though, right?
No, it was south and west.
So down here where the store was, what else was right here at this part of the community?
Look.
How many other homes, say? How many other people lived down in right where the store and your grandparents' home?
Well, there was one just east of us here. Okay. You want the Spains. And there was 2 cottages over to the south. South, yes.
Lead beaters were in it for one. Lead beaters, and there were different ones in the other ones. There were Osborne's at one time, but that was the Myrtle cottage that I was born in.
Okay.
Yes. And Mrs. Alder lived right across over there on the top of the riverbank. I can remember that. And going up this road, the Elliots lived when I remember. And he was the manager of the elevator that was up on the railroad here.
Tell me about some memories you have of your grandparents' store, what the things that were for sale there, and I also, from the research I've done, I understand it was kind of the hub for this area for people to gather.
Oh yes, we still have a chair. I suppose we should have brought that chair today. Okay. It was set in by, I think 1 million people likely sat in it. It was an armchair, and it's worn to a degree, but it's still able to sit in it. But yes, the store just had everything in it. Some clothing, some dishes, besides, and they had the biggest chocolate bars in those days. We as a family could have one and divide it in 5 pieces, and it was a big. But my favorite thing, I guess, is those caramel suckers that they had there. Oh, they just made melt in your mouth, and just things that when we were growing up that we were kind of small at that time. But yes, it was. And then we'd come to sleigh ride in the wintertime, and they had this pot-bellied stove for heating. That was their heating, and it was so nice. You'd come in frozen mitts and frozen scarves, and you could put them on this stove, and they'd get all dried and warmed up. And yes, so the store was good for meeting children, grown-ups.
Okay.
Yes.
Do you remember skating down on the river at all?
I don't think I did very much skating on the river, but then we got a rink just down here a piece. But our mother skated on the ice on the river. But we did a lot of skating in the rink when they got, and we even played a little bit of ladies hockey, girls hockey.
Good for you.
I don't know if our rules were very good or not, but.
And okay, what about in the summertime, swimming in the river?
Well, I wasn't much for swimming. I was in a little bit, I guess, but my sister did a little more swimming than I did.
Tell me about the family dog.
Oh, our aunt had this big, lovely black Newfoundland dog, and the dog just went everywhere with us, and it came to the river. It would be swimming with us, and if we were in danger, it would have pulled us out. Oh, we had a lifeguard all to ourselves there.
Tell me how come it came to be that your grandparents chose to come over to Bunclody from England?
Well, our grandfather's health was not very good. He had asthma, and they said that if he came to Canada, he would be much better. The climate here would suit him much better, and so that was a big thing to 5 children, his wife and 5 children. It was a big decision.
I imagine, yeah, to uproot and just
to come out. But if your health is failing you, then you have to do something. And I understand that's why they came.
Do you have any memories of the railroad that you could share with me? The Great Northern played a really big part in the settling of this area. Do you remember the trains at all that went through here?
Yes. We went up with Grandpa quite often to get to pick up the mail and things.
Now let's just explain that, because we need to think that through. Like, the train didn't actually come down here into the store area, right?
No, it was a little farther up on the higher ground, like south of the store. And he had horses.
So then you had to go up there and get the freight.
Yes. Yes.
And how often did that occur? Like, do you remember how often the train went through here?
Every day. Every day. To Brandon, wasn't it? Mm-hmm.
Do you ever remember hearing that train whistle blow?
Lots of times.
So it was kind of a familiar sound for you.
Right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What other memories can you share with me? What is one that sticks out in your mind the most of this era and area?
Maybe you will.
Can you think of one?
I don't know. I think it was the valley here that we just seemed to have everything. That in the winter we had the hills to slide on. We had the skating rink. And in the summer we had the river running through. And it just seems as though we had everything to entertain ourselves. And didn't cost anything either, like it do today. Everything you do for entertainment nowadays costs you a lot of money, and we just seem to have everything here. And of course, having our grandparents here was very special. Mm-hmm. We spent a lot of time here with them.
So, how long did the store run in Bunclody here? Can you tell me that?
I don't remember when it started, but it closed. The store closed about 1956, around that time.
And just to help people understand why did the store close?
It was losing business. Cars came into being, and we could travel further and further, and the business wasn't good then. And of course, when you're that far away, you don't get the fresh fruits, you don't get the fresh things without going for them. And then too, my grandmother was getting older, and in fact, she was over 80, and my 2 aunts, it was very hard. It was difficult for them to keep on the business. My one aunt that went for freight, it was very, very heavy lifting for her, and it's surprising that she did it for so many years. Mm-hmm.
And once the Great Northern no longer ran, that would have been in the late 1930s or so, then how did they get their supplies?
After the railroad went out, they had to go to Minto to get the mail. And for quite a few years, and then they did go to Carroll, which was a little closer. They got their freight from Carroll. But they did all their going themselves. They had an Essex car, and it must have been a good car because it never let them down. But you didn't have antifreeze in that time either, so it meant every time you went out in the wintertime, you had to get the water hot on the stove and put it in the radiator, and then your car started for you. All these things were quite different.
Things we take for granted.
Things we take for granted now.
Do you have any idea what happened to the store then once it closed? Do either one of you know? Where did the store go?
You know, I'm not sure where the store went. I know the house went to the Brandon Hills area.
Oh.
I can remember it being moved there, and you know, I can't remember about the store.
Okay. Tell me one more thing, though, that I hadn't thought at all about. When you mentioned how the store itself and where they stored everything had to be so secure, especially for rodents such as mice and that. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, in those days, you got winter supplies in for the whole year, and that meant that you would get 100-pound bags of flour. And so to keep the rodents out, they had a house behind the one of the buildings, and it was securely built and with tin up so far so that the mice and rodents couldn't get in there. Because mice love to get flour.
Oh, yeah. And when you're considering that that's your winter supply, that's the last thing you needed was a problem like that occurring. So.
And they had an implement business, like they had repairs. You could go, they had a lot of bolts and nuts and all these little things that for repairs at one time when they first started.
What about a blacksmith shop? Because we're talking back when I'm sure the horses were still being used quite a bit when your grandparents first came.
They didn't have a blacksmith shop. I suppose everybody must have done their own, or maybe had to go to Souris all that way or something for a blacksmith. Yes, you're right. We didn't have that.
Well, this is a fascinating little spot, and we thank you very much for sharing your memories with us. Thank you. Be more fun at any picnic than a good baseball game, where nobody really ever goes out. Your bases are a rock or an old shoe, and the kids always get to bat. The kids are really having a lot of fun, and I guess that's, from what I hear, their favorite part of the picnic is the baseball game. We've just finished a delicious potluck supper here at our picnic, and we're just going to go around now and find some people that have memories to share with us. First of all, can you tell me your name, please?
My name is Shirley Rose.
And Shirley, where do you live now today?
In Brandon.
But you have roots right here in Bunclody?
I was born here, yes.
So when you say born here, does that mean you were born right down in the settlement where the store was? Or?
No, it's what'll it be, about 2 miles, 1 mile, 1 mile west and about 1 mile south, and then another quarter of a mile. We were just a quarter of a mile from the school.
Okay.
The school and church were up.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Yes. And your family farmed then?
Yes, yep.
So you went to school in the Bunclody school?
I did.
Tell me a little bit about the school. How many grades were in that school?
You know, I can't remember. I can remember one year there was 32 desks, and we had more students than we had desks. So they had to put in extra chairs and table, and so there'd be at least 34 or 35 going at that time. Yeah.
And one teacher?
One teacher, and grades 1 to about 9, 8 or 9. I can't remember.
And so then when you were done, let's say it was 8 or 9, then where did you go to school after that?
I went into Brandon to the collegiate. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I took grade 9 by correspondence and then went to Brandon for grade 10. Yeah.
So tell me about a memory, say, of the Bunclody School. You must have had a few Christmas concerts there.
I think the biggest memory was the fall suppers that they had.
Ooh.
And the next day, they came back for cleanup. And of course, that was very exciting because we all had lunch of the leftovers, and there was always lots of pie left and all the rest. And this was very exciting for the students because they have all the community there. And yeah.
And did you have dances at the school then?
Yes, we did. Not regularly. There was a few years there that they had them every week during the winter, but they used to have card parties, and at one time they went around from house to house, but then eventually they would go to the school. That was kind of the community gathering place, and yeah.
So when you needed to buy supplies, though, you came down here to the store at Bunclody.
Yes.
And did you take part in some of the events that went on at the river and wintertime? And
Yes. Tobogganing and skating and skating on the river, I remember. That was always fun. Yeah.
So how long have you lived in, did you live in this community then?
Oh, maybe about 25 years. Yeah, something like that. It's a long time since. Yeah.
So now they have this annual picnic here each year?
Yes.
How long has this been on the go?
Well, I suppose since the store was taken away, has it?
That was in 56.
56. Okay. So that's quite a while. Yeah.
Have you pretty well made it to all of the picnics?
Yes, most of them I have. Yes. Yeah. It's not too far to come from Brandon, and it's nice to get together. And some of these kids, you see them once a year, and
You can kind of watch them grow.
Yeah.
So you left this community then once you were finished school, you went to Brandon?
No, I finished school in Brandon, and then I think I was home for a while. I can't remember. Oh, dear.
But you didn't come back to live in this community then?
I did a few times, yes.
So is this still home to you?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Well, this is a great place to call home. Thank you for sharing your memories.
All right.
Here's another lady that we found at our picnic. Can you share your name with us, please?
I'm Ann Spain
And where do you live at today, Anne?
in Brandon.
But this was home to you for how many years?
44 and a half.
So tell me about where you came from.
Before I came? Oh, well, actually, I guess I was born in Wawanesa.
Okay.
And I lived for a while in Carroll and then in Brandon.
Okay. So you met a gentleman from here, and this is where you made your life? So tell me about when you very first came to Bunclody. What were your impressions of this community?
Well, for one thing, I thought it was a strange community because there were about umpteen different ways to get into Bunclody. You come in from the south, you come in from the west, you come in from the north, and this little community was right here. So I found it very confusing to start with.
You were never sure which way to go to town.
Right. Well, it was sort of a combination of a lot of different towns around, and then Bunclody was just sort of its own right here.
So did you farm here and raised your children here then? So you will have memories of the school as a parent then, right?
Right.
Tell me about some of your thoughts compared to the schooling back then as to where we're at today with education. Like your children were in a one-room class with one teacher.
Right.
What do you think about the education that they received?
Well, I think there are pros and cons for both. When our older daughter started school, there were 5 of them that started, which was fine. You know, they had each other and so on, and somebody to work with. And when my younger daughter started, she was all by herself. And I think that was a very, well, I think she really suffered for that. Like, she needed other kids to be with, to work with, and this sort of thing. Mm-hmm.
And you also have memories of the Bunclody store here, right?
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
Tell me a bit about the store.
Well, it was rather unique. I remember it being a very interesting place. It had a great big stove in it in the wintertime, I know. And everything was wrapped up in brown paper and string and so on.
Because there was no bags, I guess, to use the way we have now.
Not the way we have now. And I think they bought things in bulk, or this sort of thing, and they'd measure out the sugar or whatever it was you wanted. So it was quite interesting. Yeah.
So even when you bought flour, like it was measured out then, and
Well, I don't remember flour so much.
sugar?
Sugar, yes. Remember brown sugar in particularly. Mm-hmm.
And was there clothing at the store or material, that kind of thing?
Well, there could have been some material. I don't just remember that, but I remember they had big candy jars, and they were always quite interesting. And the store was here until 1956.
Okay.
And I remember that well because that was the year our younger daughter was born. So, mm-hmm.
So you were able to come down to the store then for your mail, is that, or was there another spot where you picked up your mail?
No, the mail was in the store. The post office was in there, and ladies that ran the store, they also ran the post office.
Okay. So by the time you came actually to Bunclody, the Great Northern was done with, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
But did you ever see the Great Northern from another spot anywhere?
Not that I remember. I can remember when I was little and living in Carroll. It was east of town, but not really.
Do you remember them when they disassembled the bridge, I guess, that the railroad went up? Was it still here when you came, maybe?
No, it was gone. I think it was in 1936 they took it out.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I do remember them bringing the big timbers and so on. I remember them bringing them up to Carroll. Yeah.
And how did they bring them up? Was it tractors or something?
Well, I don't know. I imagine it'd be horses, but I'm not sure.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Got to think back into the right era here, don't we? Yeah, I bet you it would have been the horses probably
I'm not sure
too.
about that either, but I don't remember them bringing there, but I remember them being in town because we used to play on them.
So would you say this had been a pretty fine area to raise your family?
Oh, definitely. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your memories of Bunclody. Tell me another lady that we've had the pleasure of meeting today is Minnie Smith. Hi, Minnie. Tell me how your history begins here with Bunclody.
Well, my grandfather and family came out from Nova Scotia in 1892, and part of their farm ended up in the Lily district, which is west of here, and the other half of the farm is in the Bunclody district. And my dad was just 9 years old when they came out from Nova Scotia. And,
Do you have any idea why they came to this area in particular?
well, my grandfather had a sister married to a McPherson and they came out in 1879 to Brandon Hills. And I think she wanted the rest of her family to come out here because they were the only ones here. And that's where I spent first year when the folk came out at Brandon Hills, a little house full of people. And so that's how my uncle Hugh McPherson could help my grandfather find the land and so on.
Okay, so then your father chose to farm this area then?
Mm-hmm.
You were born where?
On farm, where my son is now farming. Like Dad farmed the farm before, and then my husband and I were there, and now our son is farming.
So that would make that a century farm, does it not?
Yes, it'll be a century farm next year.
Okay.
But where my grandfather homesteaded, it was in 1892, and so we had a a special centennial farm celebration in the spring of 1993. Mm-hmm.
Very nice. So tell me about some of your first memories as a child of this Bunclody area. We talk about the store down here, but it was actually a wider spread area because the Bunclody school and church were located a little distance away, right?
Right, yes. We were 3 miles from school and 3 miles from the store, and we often wished that the store and the school and the church were down in the valley where the store was, and then they could have got their groceries and the mail and everything when they would come for us at school. They could have done everything at once.
Do you have any idea of the history of why that didn't happen?
I was led to understand that it was somebody offered the land for it, so
For the school
and the church too. So that's kind of how.
And the store, I think, came about because a lot to do with the railroad, did it not? Or
Well, yes, Mr. McGill was the first postmaster, here, and he had settled here, and so just developed from that, I guess, from being from the first postmaster.
can you remember some visits to the store?
Oh, yes, I remember the oiled floor.
Oiled?
Yes, it was a wood floor, and it was oiled, like Woolworths in Brandon used to be the same. There was an oil floor in there. And I remember they had a great big heater with a large round top on it. And after sliding down the hills in the winter, and our mitts would be all wet, and then we'd set them on the top of this heater to dry.
What did you use to slide down the hills? Do you remember that part?
Well, we had sleighs, and we had a toboggan, too, when, we had a toboggan.
And then you would skate on the river?
Well, I never skated on the river, but I did skate in the rink here. We never got down too often, but there was a rink here that those that lived closer did lots of skating.
And what about swimming in the summertime as a child especially? Do you remember swimming in the river?
No, we never really came swimming here. No, I guess my parents weren't swimmers, and I didn't come swimming.
What can you tell me about the Great Northern? Do you have any memories of that in any way?
Oh, yes, I remember we had friends at Boisvane, and my sister, who was 4 years older than me, we got on the train here one morning and went down to Boisvane to visit these friends, and then we got on it and came back that night. Like, the train just went in the morning, went south, and came back at night. So I remember that train ride too.
I've read a little bit in history about when a circus would come through on the train. Do you remember that at all?
Never saw too much of it, but I remember seeing it from a distance one time. I don't just know where we were, but when I think about it, we were 3 miles, you see, from.
True.
So, but I remember once seeing it. I don't know just where we were at the time. But.
And what about, I've also read about how it was an opportunity for people to go into the Brandon Fair. Did you?
Yes. My husband mentioned it when he was a child, that his mom and dad and he went in at night and stayed overnight in the hotel in Brandon and went to the winter fair and then came home the next day. But the only train ride I had was to Boisvane.
Huh. So then you married and raised a family right here in this area?
Yes, we did, in 1948. And we had a son and a daughter, and that grew up here, went to Bunclody School. And then it was in...
So was that the same school that you attended then?
Right.
But there was actually 2 schools built, was there not, for Bunclody?
Yes, I don't remember the first school that was built. It was gone before I remember.
But you attended your children attended the same school you did then?
Yeah, to grade Well, Sharon went to grade 9 here and then went into Souris. There was a small van that used to pick them up and go in. Well, then when Murray, I think it was when he went into grade 8 or grade 7. Well, it was 1966, the school closed here. The whole school closed. And then they put on a bus for all the children from this district to go into Souris. Mm-hmm.
So as a young child growing up, if you needed to go to a big center, where would that have been?
Well, we went to Souris a lot. That was our town, really.
All right.
Yeah.
And do you ever remember going to Brandon then? Was that?
Oh, yes. I remember seeing them grade the number 2 highway with, and I don't know whether that fellow had all mules or whether there was a couple of mules and the others were horses, but I remember something about mules. And then also we used to look for the buffalo. There used to be a couple of buffalo in where the Keystone Center is now. It was fairgrounds at that time. And we always used to look for these buffalo. It was a novelty.
Do you have any memories or stories that may have been shared with you about the incredible bridges that existed in this area? Like there was obviously the one for the Great Northern, but there was also the one for highway traffic. Do you remember anything about the bridges?
No, not particularly. I remember when they rebuilt this traffic bridge, you know, when we were kids, and then it was being rebuilt again since that.
Okay.
But,
So, do you know anything about when the first part of it fell down or anything?
no, that.
But that did happen, right?
Yes, that's what I've been. Yes, that's what I've been told.
That half of the bridge fell down overnight one night. So then the next one they built. Is that the one you remember then?
Well, I'm not sure. I remember, when I was quite young, about them rebuilding the bridge, and then in later years, putting up a new one.
And is that the present one then now?
Yes,
okay.
The one that was after I was married, that they built this one. The one before that had high, like timbers, up over the.
Okay. Was it timber or metal? Do you remember that part?
To me, it seemed like it was timber.
Okay.
Yeah.
And of course, the one you have here today is out of cement.
Yes.
It's been there for a while, I suspect now, eh?
Yes. But, the bridges, I know it was the same in Souris. They used to have these big timbers up, over top.
Okay.
But now they don't build bridges because there are too many high things that go over. Wouldn't be able to otherwise.
So when you think back of your years here in this lovely community, are there any memories that stand out in particular? Because you've pretty much had a lifelong time here, right?
Yeah. We moved to Souris in 1992. And so spent many years here.
Is there anything that stands out in particular to you in your memories?
Oh, well, all the, when in school, it was going to the festivals and the Christmas concert and the Valentine parties and things like that, I guess. And then as an adult, we kept the community alive. We used to have, in the winter, have community gatherings in the school. The school closed, but we used it as a community center for a number of years.
We haven't talked about that.
Yeah, we used it as a community center, and our community organization, the Willing Workers, we used to have a tea there every year, and it was really active. And then one thing that I'm really so pleased that we did was to start this park, because when Martin's had the store here, everything was so nice and neat and tidy, beautiful. And then when it was sold, things didn't work out the way they had planned. Right. And things were just let go and looked awful, and big weeds and everything. And then eventually the buildings were all gone, and there was these holes in the ground with weeds. So we started talking about it in 1967, but really didn't get it going until 1917. And I think that was one of the best things that ever happened in Bunclody. because it's been so nice ever since.
And that's just basically been done on community spirit, right?
Oh, definitely. All volunteer work. All of it. Yeah. Yeah, it's been especially because the Martins had kept such a nice place, and it just broke your heart to come down here and see it in the state it was in.
Well, I'm sure they'd be quite proud of what you've all done here.
Yes, I think they'd be quite pleased to think that this ground is still being used, you know, as a community center.
I think so.
Yeah, I think they would be really happy.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your memories with us.
You're welcome.
Do you guys want some gum?
And you know that community spirit we've been talking about? Well, here's a gal who certainly has that. This is Donna Fenwick. Hi, Donna. Tell us a little bit about this little park that you guys have right here. I understand that it was in about the 1970s that you got it started?
Right. We had a big celebration here in 1970, and we dedicated our first cairn that year. We had, I don't know how many people here. We had a great big parking lot, and we had a PA system and tons and tons of people. They had commemorative spoons, commemorative plates, pins. It was very, very good.
And like that's already now, when we think about it, 30 years ago, right?
Yes, a long time. Yes.
So you've been able to, this is all volunteerism we see here, right?
Correct, yes.
There's no money that's available for mowing the grass or
No,
anything
all
like
volunteer. Everything we do, we make up a list in the spring, and each community or each family has a turnip mowing. We pass out the mowing sheets at the very first meeting in May, and when the person mows, they just phone the next one, and they come and mow. And the only time we might do ahead of schedule mowing is if there's going to be something special at the park. We've had people that phone and want a special picnic, and so we will mow it for them. We've had a wedding here. We've had wedding pictures here. And other than that, just family reunions. Nothing more.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about your connection with this. You live right across the road?
Yes. My dad grew up here, grew up where we live. We have a century farm.
Oh, you have a century farm. That's fascinating. So that's your grandparents' farm then?
Yes. Yeah, my grandfather built the house that we live in now, and my mom and dad lived there, and now we live there.
So you don't really have memories of much of what was here at one time, right? It'll be the stories that you've been told?
I remember the store and the house.
Do you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I can remember the day they sold the store, like the auction. I know, the auction sale. I can remember them building the bridge, because my mom fed the people that built the bridge.
Oh.
Yeah, so basically, other than that, the railroad and all that sort of stuff is what I get from,
From the stories you hear. Yeah. So, what do you find is the most interesting thing probably right about this area? Because you like history.
Right.
So tell me something that really interests you in the fact of the history of this area.
Oh, probably the railroad. I really like to hear about the railroad, and the different people that used to live here. All I could see from here, pictures is the skating rink and that sort of stuff. And so I enjoy hearing pictures about that and what they did for entertainment back then. Because, of course, they just made their own entertainment, correct? Yeah. Nothing was organized at that time.
Was the skating rink actually a closed-in building or just an open-air rink?
An open-air rink with a little shack beside it.
So did they pump water up from the river then for it?
Yeah. And they had a ball diamond, not here, just across the river, and they played ball every Sunday there.
Community-based spirit.
You better believe it.
Well, this has been a great day, and we'd like to thank everyone for helping us make this tape, because this is a fascinating area. And all the best in the years to come. Like, you've had 30 good years here since the park started, and we wish you many more.
Thank you very much.
Mark Smurl of Killarney actually taught in the Bunclody school here. Marge, tell us a little bit about when you taught in the school.
Well, I came fresh out of normal school, and I didn't know as much as the kids did, I don't think. But it was a great year. They were great kids, and it was quite interesting. I boarded with Doug and Cassie Stewart and their two sons, Don and Mel. And either Cassie or Don would drive us all to school in their truck. And then the kids had to do the chores like sweeping and so on.
Lighting the fires?
No, it
No?
was that was had been changed over before I got there. I cleaned the boards and cleaned the brushes and swept the floor and did the dusting.
Oh, would you like to introduce this gentleman beside you here? I understand he's one of your former students.
He is. This is Don Stewart, and I boarded with his mom and dad and Don, and he was one of the ones that rode in the truck with me. He was in grade 3 and 4 while I was there.
So do you have some fond memories of a country school?
Oh yeah, let's see, we played lots of recess times, and it was different that there was all one classroom had every grade, and you look back at it was more of a family thing in the classroom. All the kids knew each other so well. We play outside recess. It was a neat thing.
So how many grades was that you were teaching at one time, Mark?
Well, it was grade 1 to 9. The grade 9 was taking correspondence. The inspector came and got that arranged. And then he left during the year. He moved out to Calgary. So, but it was regular grade 1 to 8.
So Don, Bunclody's played a big part in your life then? Have you lived here for a while, or where are you from now?
I live here in the same place that where I was back in '57 there. I've been there forever, yeah.
So this has been home for a while. Do you have memories of this area, though, as a young child? Do you remember any stories that you were told or anything that you'd be able to share with us?
Oh, stories. It's old-time stories. There was a Mr. Spain, Norm Spain's grandfather was a real character, and he would stuff me with stories. And apparently on our farm, one time there had been a graveyard, and he told me about this graveyard being moved, and there's lots of good stuff like that. And I guess back in those times, during Halloween times, they used to do lots of tricks and stuff like that. And Christmas concerts were good. Mrs. Spain and Mrs. Rose, they were real instigators in getting the Christmas concerts going and plays and stuff. That was sort of nice.
Ever been told any stories about the Great Northern?
Oh yeah, the Great Northern. That comes to mind. One story was there was a team of horses stuck on the track when the train was coming through, and they jumped to the ice surface to get off the track. Oh wow, that's pretty neat. And we have this tunnel down here that people go and look at. It's just a culvert, but they call it a tunnel.
Yeah.
And you actually can't see through it, and you can go walk through there now. It's there. It's a culvert.
And what was it used for?
It's just a water run through the railway track trestle.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then it's got the date on there and everything. Yeah. So that's neat too.
Yeah, fascinating.
Yeah. I can remember the store being here when I was a kid. Well, you would too, probably.
That was the year I was here.
Vaguely remember it. So. Then there's an elevator abutment up in the background here, so where the elevator was. The whole grain here. That was neat. Yeah.
Good old days.
Well, these are vague memories now that we were talking 30. You know, you got to start thinking too. That's a while back, and yeah, it's sort of good. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just wanted to mention, unless somebody has told you about when the store closed, then the mail service had to be changed, and the locals all got together, and somebody built a box and made slots in it for each person's mail, and then each family took turns every mail day and went to Carroll, brought the mail, and delivered it to everybody's home until they got the rural mail service going. So that's one of their community things that they really work together on.
And I think that's the one thing I'm hearing continually about this, is this community-based spirit that you have here, and it's lingered for a lot of years.
Oh yeah, it's pretty neat because the people that have left are always welcome back, and it's just like they never left.
Yeah.
That's good.
And you're here to testify to that. You haven't left yet.
Oh, well, no, there's a few of the young guys that continue farming from their fathers, and so that's why. Yeah.
Well, I think this is kind of unique, still having a teacher and one of her former students here with us, and we wish you both the very best.
Thank you. A lot bigger than you was then.
Yeah.
This is some of... Ellen and Ann Rose of Brandon weren't able to be with us at the picnic, but they've taken time out of their busy day today to spend a little time with us to talk to us about Bunclody. And can you tell me how your history begins with Bunclody?
Yes, actually I was born at Forest, but my parents, Mr. and Mrs. George Marshall, they moved down to Bunclody in 1932, and of course the whole family came. And what I remember still about the wonderful impression of the valley and where the home farm was, the railroad ran through, the GN Railroad ran through our farm, the river ran through our farm, and it was all fruit blossoms and fruit trees, and we really just loved the farm. And one of the most interesting things that we discovered after we had been there for a little while was just north of our farm on the railroad track there was a tunnel that had been built. And it was a great thing to go through this tunnel.
Explain a little bit to us about the tunnel, because people won't know what the idea of this whole thing was.
Well, actually it was built to bring water from one side of a great big ravine underneath the railroad tracks to the other side, and therefore down to the river. And so it was cemented in. It was a cement cover, and you could stand up and walk three abreast to go through the tunnel. And I just can't remember how many feet long it was, but it was fairly long.
Somebody said 400 feet.
So it was quite a length of tunnel. I know when you got right to the halfway, you couldn't see light at either of the ends of the tunnel. So it made it real scary and really interesting, and certainly all our friends who came from Forest loved to go through that tunnel. So that was a big drawing card. But the
reason that the tunnel was there, evidently, when they built the railway, and they actually filled that ravine with dirt, and they put a pipe in the bottom, but it collapsed the first year. So they had to come back in with crews, and they set them up at both sides, I think. And they came in from both sides and dug a tunnel through. I have no idea how they cemented it up like they did, but that's why it was there.
And all done for the purpose of stopping their grade washing away for the bridge that they had there.
The water had to get through there somehow. Yeah. Yeah.
And it still remains there today, does it not? So that you can go in it if you want?
I think so. The last time I was there was probably 20 years ago, but I haven't heard. The last time we were through, the beaver had trailed various sizes of trees in there, but they were considerate enough to leave a path along one side so you could get through. But I'm sure that would be washed out the next spring. But yeah, as far as I know, it's still there and still.
And rather unique, is it not? Because did they do this anywhere else that you know of when they had, well, I guess that they only crossed the Souris once with the Great Northern too, didn't they?
Well, where they crossed the river, they actually put a trestle bridge. Okay. But no, there were other places that had pipes.
So this is just like for a ravine?
This is a ravine, P. Deemer's Ravine it was called, okay. Yeah. And there were other places that had pipes. There were cast iron pipes, but they didn't collapse, and so there was one right down at the valley. If you come down the south hill there, you go through what they call the chain fence area, and just to the right, if you're going down, to the east, is where the railway crossed, and there's a pipe through there. Yeah, right. Yeah. But it wasn't as large as the P. Deemer Ravine. Yeah, it was the largest that I know of on that track. Yeah.
Okay, while we're on the topic of the Great Northern, do you have memories of the Great Northern?
I most certainly do. It was still thrilling to hear the train go through in the morning, come out from Brandon in the morning and then back every night and hear its whistle. And I was on it once or twice. We would ride from Brandon back home. And one of the things I remember was the circus train coming through. And we had to, wherever we were, we knew it was coming on the Sunday, and we were listening and listening. And of course it was blowing its whistle for miles back. and we would all be congregated down there watching the train go through. And in those days, there were the real live animals hanging out of these circus trains, and the elephants and the lions, and you could see them all, you know, and it went very slowly, and it was most interesting. Also, I can remember my dad, when we shipped cream, and if he ever didn't get to the station, Bunclody or Hayslip, to put his cream can on the station, he would flag the train down, and they would stop and pick up his can of cream. Another thing I remember about was putting pennies on the track, and I don't think we did it very often because pennies were rather scarce in those days, but they'd come out huge, you know, and I'm so sorry we never kept one. I don't have one now, and I had several, though, at the time, but that was an exciting thing to do. But no, the train was a big part of our life, and of course it shut down in 1936 when the train stopped running, and the whole of Bunclody, of course, were very sorry when it stopped running, but that was a big part of our farming life was when the train was going through, the circus train. Yes,
the circus train actually was the midway show for the Brandon Fair. It kicked off that midway, and then they traveled from there on west up through a circuit, didn't they? Calgary, Regina, those places. And they didn't come back through Bunclody, but they came up on the Great Northern. Yeah.
From the States?
From the States, yeah. And it was a long train, and I expect much heavier than they were accustomed. They traveled very slowly. And Ab Osborne told me that they always stopped. It was a steamer, of course, and they always stopped at Bunclody for water. But to do that, they had to stop on the bridge because the water tank was on the north side there.
Yeah.
So they unhooked off the circus train or back a little bit, so it wouldn't be sitting on the bridge while they were stopped to get water. Yeah.
Oh, fascinating history.
I thought that was interesting, yeah.
And we have some pictures of the trouble the Great Northern would run into in the wintertime. Let's talk a little bit about the snow.
Well, we'd heard a lot of that. Sometimes it was held up for a week before it got out of there. And it would be the local people that went, and sometimes, apparently, they just get it thawed out, and the rails again, the tracks, they'd be frozen to the rails, and they'd have to start all over again. And we had a tremendous amount of snow in those years, you know, that you don't have now. But I know some of the neighbors would have to be bringing hot biscuits and so on down to the workers, and it was a major deal in the wintertime back there. Most of the time, I think it ran on time, but there were a few occasions where it was certainly held up with the mountains of snow that they used to have in those days. But anyway, as I say, it was a very important part of our lives when we there.
And Ellen, you mentioned to me you thought the tree factor had something to do with that.
Well, there weren't very many trees when the railway was built. Like, it was more scrubby. You can see pictures now of that, of them building it, and there were just kind of like willows around, you know.
And that's because of the prairie fires that had occurred, right?
I think so. There weren't many trees anywhere prior to settlement. Like, they even had to drive to the Turtle Mountain to get wood for kitchen stoves and to heat their houses and so on. In just little pockets of wood along the river that were protected, I guess, from the fire. And in a few years, the wood recovered. And in my lifetime, back in the 30s, my dad used to haul wood out of there. But it was, you had to ask, and those that had it, you know, they kind of rationed it out. It wasn't all that plentiful, even then, yeah. But no, I think the reason that there weren't many trees, the trees weren't as large. Like nowadays, the track wouldn't drift in because the trees would catch the snow and hold it back. That didn't happen back then, yeah. And it just blew in. And some of those cuts, you know, were cut through and it just drifted in there and drifted right across, yeah.
Let's talk a little bit, too, now about the town of Bunclody. You obviously would have memories of the store and different things down there.
Yes, I thought I would tell you a little bit about the willing workers, the one and only group that have been very active in Bunclody for a long time that's really has kept it running. As I say, we moved down in 1932, and actually that was the year it was formed. So my mother was a member of the willing workers. And just last year, we celebrated the 70th anniversary of the willing workers. And it's just been going strong. And actually, is taking care of all the needs, you know, of Bunclody. When something had to be looked after, something had to be done. We have a meeting every month, and it goes from about 20 members down to about 5 sometimes. But one of the things that has delighted us that the young people now are carrying on so wonderfully well with the willing workers. And once you get to have an office in the willing workers, you're usually there for the duration. And of course, we've taken every office there ever was. But it sort of kept Bunclody going, along with Vince Dodds. I don't know if you'd ever heard of Vince Dodds.
Well, I've been hearing a little bit about this gentleman since we've started talking about Bunclody.
Well,
tell me about him, though.
I think he really thought that the name Bunclody was rather odd, and his background was from Elgin, so he was familiar with it. But he started when he was broadcasting from CKX in Brandon to talk about something about Bunclody, and it was all really his imagination. But we had a wonderful Bunclody marching band, according to Vince, and we used to practice under the railroad bridge, and that was lots of fun. But people got so they would really tune in to see what he was going to say next about Bunclody. Somebody's animal got stuck on the swinging bridge in Surrey, and according to Vince, you know, but he always had something funny to say about Bunclody, so we were happy about that.
Well, we talked maybe just a little bit before you move on in regards to how Bunclody got its name then?
Yes, the McGills, who were the first settlers there, and he was pretty active in the community. They were Salvation Army people from Bunclody in Ireland, down the County Wexford in the southeast corner of Ireland. And when they moved to Bunclody, they farmed, and he was one of actually the earliest settler. So when the few more gathered, they asked what he thought they should be called. And he named it Bunclody after his hometown in Ireland. I understood when they also moved to Vancouver that they called their home out there Bunclody too. But we were always happy with the name. Some people pronounced it Bunclody, but and a friend of ours was over there not very long ago, and there's still the sign on the road in Ireland, and it's spelt L-O-I-D-I over there, but we always pronounced it and spelled it.
That's the Gaelic spelling. Yeah. Irish Gaelic. Yeah. Spelled Bunclody the same in Ireland as it is here, the English spelling. My grandmother, whose father was Irish, I guess, she pronounced it Bunclody. And I expect she thought the rest of us should too, but that didn't happen. It's Bunclody, yeah. It is a Gaelic. I think it comes from Gaelic, likely. Yeah. But the name actually was given to the school. When the school was formed in 1884, Mr. McGill was on the board, and he had the privilege or managed to get it named Bunclody. So that officially made it Bunclody. And then when the railway came through, they took that name and applied it to the village. The village was actually a couple of miles away from where the school was.
And I had a little trouble understanding that at first. Like, it just didn't seem right that everything wasn't in one spot. But it had to do with the time of the settling and whatnot, right?
The railway came through, 20 years later, about 1906. And the community actually started to take shape back about 1880. And the school, I mentioned, I think they opened classes in 1885. So it was about 20 years later. And the railway took the name, and that really shifted the community center from what had been up around the church and the school. The church was beside the school, down to the valley, which was a couple of miles as the crow flies, a little further by car. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, what about the church? It would play a part in your life too, I presume.
Oh yes, very much so. Everybody took turns in looking after the church. When we just had services in the summer, and we had a supply minister, usually out from Surrey, that came out and had the services in Bunclody, and usually whoever, after the church service, somebody always asked them home for lunch. You know, that was a standard practice, I think, back in those days. And it was a sad day when the church had to close. But
and why was that? Just
just the difference in the population. At one time, really, the church would be filled. In fact, when they started in 1908, when the church opened, they had 3 services a day, and it was open for anybody, any
So a non-denominational?
Non-denomination. Anybody who wished to have a service there were very welcome. There was never a wedding or a funeral. I believe there was one funeral, but no weddings ever in the church. But I was in the choir there for years. The older ladies always made sure the young people were in the choir. And how I do remember sitting up there in the choir. A dear friend that was, a lady friend that was sitting beside me, she was a gal who liked to pass peppermints. And this is one thing I remember. She'd pass me a peppermint, and they were quite big, sitting up there in the choir. And I never knew whether to put it in my mouth. If I held it in my hand, it all got sticky and melted. And that was part of my memories of the choir. But there were days when the young people were asked to take part in the services, so it was an important part. And
so when the church was full, how many would it have seated?
Oh, 50 or more, I would think. I know at one time, a little article we read when we were at the archives in Winnipeg, it said that if we got any more in the church, they would soon have to have ushers. And that always delighted us because everybody kind of had their own pew, you know. The families went to one certain pew, and but it was a place that you just went to on Sunday. Everybody went, and then they visited after, stayed around and visited. And the willing workers, of course, they also were ones that looked after having it repapered when it was needed. The willing workers just took over anything that needed to be done. Certainly when the wartime came, they were the ones that knitted the socks and sent them over to the boys, and they donated to donated to the Milk for Britain Fund and the Red Cross, and took over the...
Donated to the what? Tell me that.
Milk for Britain. That was one of the things that was called for over in Britain to get milk for the children over in Britain.
Actual milk?
Well, no, they donated to the fund, you know, so that they would have milk in Britain. So that was one of the things I remember was donating to, and also looking after some of the needs of the Surrey Hospital. We used to do little things like donate all new face cloths and all waste paper baskets and that kind of thing until the government took over, of course, and then that was we didn't do that anymore.
So you spoke about there would be one funeral there, but was there a cemetery in that area, or how did that work?
No, the people were always buried in Carroll, if anybody. There was just the one funeral that I remember. In the very early days, in the McGill family, they were actually buried right on their farm, and later were moved to the cemetery in Carroll, but there was never a cemetery in Bunclody.
So where did the church go in the end?
The church eventually, because it didn't belong to the United Church, it was interdenominational church, everything that was in it belonged to Bunclody because they had raised the funds for it. Actually, with the day it was opened, it was all paid for except for $100 through donations, you know. But the church itself went to a farm not very far away, and it was actually on that property, on that farm, they had, Mr. Miller years ago had donated the acre of land for the church to be built there. So the land reverted back to that farm. And the church was then used for just for something on the farm as a shop, you know, that kind of thing. But the stained glass windows were taken out. Somebody from the States happened to come along. They wanted the stained glass windows. So it was like the school. It also was moved and went to a farm. But the willing workers, as I say, new people moved into the community, and what we always appreciated that the young mother was always most willing to join the willing workers and take a very active part. We've had several families from overseas and been delighted that they have been interested in carrying on with the willing workers, and still are. Even some of the families have moved to Surrey or to Elgin, and they come back to our meetings, and so we're always pleased about that. Another thing they did was gather news, the willing workers, and we'd take turns. So on Monday mornings, we would ring 7 on the public phones, and everybody would come on who had news and tell you what, and it was put in the paper. For a while it was called the Bunclody Breezes, and then it was just put in the Surrey Plain Dealers, the Bunclody News.
So there was an actual Bunclody paper?
No, it was mostly sent to Surrey, to the Surrey, and some of the items also went to the Minto Packet, was called. Every so often we come across things that were printed then. It makes it very interesting for us to read back in these old papers because we're always seeing something about Bunclody, even wedding write-ups and that kind of thing. We didn't have a paper as such, but it was sent in as Bunclody Breezes and this kind of thing. So, but now they look after the park mostly, and any sales, supplying lunch, and we always have a community supper, and we always have a Christmas supper, and we have the picnic in the summertime always, and we look after that. The Bunclody itself, where it's situated now, where the park is, it was sort of the junction of the three municipalities. That was Glenwood, Oakland, and Whitewater. And when the store closed, and eventually they decided that they would put a park in that place, clean it all up, and the two municipalities brought their machinery in and got it all leveled. That was when the first cairn was put up. Okay. And in 1970, we had a big day with, I think, 500 people there for the opening, and that was dedicated to the settlers around Bunclody, the first cairn, the plaque that we have on there.
And was that book a part of this then, too?
That's when it was put together, and Alan's father, plus a lot of the other seniors, and he wrote to a lot of the people, too, to get their impressions and their stories and so on. And something that was interesting, when we were down at Salt Lake City, doing some research for genealogy, we discovered our book was down there in Salt Lake City. Just accidentally came across that. And nobody is very sure how it got there. We have no memories of anyone sending it there. But anyway, that was rather nice. I think we sold it for $1 and $2 perhaps, yeah. So, but it was a popular little book, and of course they're long gone, and we are still getting requests. Especially for new people who come from overseas. They would love a copy of our book. And we just don't have any more. And
you may have to go into a second publication.
We have been asked to do that. But most of the people that we know would be interested have got their copy. So we weren't sure if we'd ever sell a second one. But I wanted to speak about the last cairn, if that's all right with you.
Would love to know.
And we decided... Alan and I were driving one Sunday, and we noticed a small plaque and a cairn over east of our place, way over east, that talked about the honor roll and who was on the honor roll. And we began thinking about our honor roll, because when the church and the school closed, we had no place to put our First World War honor roll or our Second World War honor roll. And there was a couple of our family members, of the community members, who belonged to the Legion in Minto, and they said, well, they thought that the Legion, the small Legion house in Minto, would store them for us, which they did. But the more we thought about it, we thought our young people are never going to know who took part in the wars unless it becomes a part of that community and brought back. So we picked them up, and I brought them to the Willing Workers one night and showed them, and they were getting a little deteriorating too, and asked what they thought about it. And it was a while before they got interested and excited about this idea, but eventually the young people really got interested in it. So we composed a letter and sent it to all the descendants that we knew of and could find from the First World War. And then, of course, there were a lot more of the Second World War. We sent them to all these people and said what we had in mind. And we knew we could get a grant from Manitoba, to help us with the cost, because we knew this was going to be costly. And we had decided that if it went through, that we would get another big stone from one of the farms and use that to match the stone that was there. And the response was just terrific. We had more money than we needed, and we had phone calls from Toronto and from Winnipeg, and one from
the Maritimes. Make sure we had enough money, because they were prepared to send more, I guess. Yeah.
Nice. That's unusual, isn't it?
Yeah, that was what was so delightful, that everybody was gung-ho to go through with this. And when we knew that we were going to be able to do this, I think there were 46 names on the first honor roll from the First World War, and 14, I believe it was, on the Second World War. And there was only one person, one young man, that was killed in the Second World War from Bunclody, and he had lived in Bunclody on a farm, and we managed to get the stone from that farm. So we had written to his mother to tell her that the stone had come from the farm where they had lived. So the young people got busy and that big stone got moved down, and we have a tape of that somewhere. It was a great community event, you know, to get that moved and get the stone just straight, and we eventually had the plaque made of granite and got it.
Got that big stone there, you know, and it's a huge thing. We finally got it tipped up, standing there, and we had ladies saying, you should have it over just a little. You don't move that big stone a little this way.
But one comment about one of the young men in the community said that he really enjoyed that because it was a community project that we could work on, you know, so that was good. And we had the dedication, too, of that cairn, and not that long ago, in the year 2000. And then we had decided that it would have 2 small plaques put on the edges, just like to match the other one, the original one that was there. And so that's where we have that the name came from Bunclody in Ireland. That's on one of the plaques. And the other one just in honor of the willing workers who have been active in the community for 70 years and still will be, hopefully. So we don't know when the end of them will be, but it's rather interesting that the group like the willing workers have gone on so long, because in most of the communities, you know, they sort of fall apart after a few years. But
our lives get too busy and other things happen, and those kind of groups don't often last anywhere near that length of time. So
that's certainly what we have found in other small neighboring communities around. They just don't have a group anymore. So we're very happy that the willing workers are still very active in our community. So maybe Alan has some things to add to all this.
Alan, tell us, though, how your life story begins with Bunclody.
Well, I was born there, but my father moved there, my grandfather, I should say, moved there in 1897, and my father was like 3 years old at the time. And I won't tell you when I was born there, but it's a while. I was there for 80 years. I lived in the community for 80 years before we moved to town.
So you farmed there, right?
Yes, we did. Yeah. And pretty well never was away. Well, I was in the services for a little while, but beyond that, Bunclody was always home. Yeah. So there were a lot of changes. I think the name is a bit unique to begin with, and the community seemed to have a flair for things. The church they just did things a little differently sometimes, the church being a union church rather than a united church. And there aren't that many of those. Most churches were denominational one way or other. During the 30s, we had all kinds of young people around. It was during the Depression. Unemployment was everywhere. You couldn't get jobs. I remember girls very often went into the teaching profession, and there were so many young teachers around that in the middle 1930s, they were looking for a teacher, and the secretary-treasurer brought the applications in a basket. There were dozens and dozens of them, people looking for jobs. Anyway, going back to Bunclody, we had lots of young folks around, so they thought they'd build a rink, which was a good idea. And didn't have.
So up to this point, though, you would go skating down on the river.
Yeah, they used to skate on the river. Some of them skated from Bunclody to Riverside. I never went that far, but some of them had gone that far. Occasionally the river would flood, and when it did, it would just be a beautiful sheet of ice for miles, you know, occasionally.
So then they pumped water up from the river to make your rink?
That's what they did. They were much more optimistic than that when they built the rink. They thought that they could drill a well down right beside the river. They built the rink right on the side of the riverbank to begin with, right at the corner of the bridge. And they thought that they could put a well down right beside it because it was only a few feet from the water. And obviously it would be full. And besides that, Martin's up at the store had a 20-foot deep well, and there was no end of water in it. Anyway, it didn't turn out that way. They dug a well down, but they never got a drop of water. So after that, they had to pump it up from the river. But anyway, to raise money for the rink, they decided to have a sports day. I don't know. I wasn't in on this, you know, but they didn't even have a ball diamond. They, well, they had a ball diamond in Copeland's pasture, but there was barely room for the diamond, never mind any more diamonds. So it was custom back in those years to, for the rotation for farmers was 2 crops in summer fall. So in the 3rd year, when it was to be summer fall of the next year, they didn't plow it in the fall. So it stayed in stubble over winter. And then after seeding, they would plow it for summer fall. So they arranged to, Osborne's donated the field, and they went out and they took one of these fields that was still in stubble. They cut the stubble. I presume somebody was given the assignment of cutting off 16-inch boards for home plate. They filled dirt bags with dirt for bases, and they stepped off the diamond. I know very well they didn't measure them. I think they stepped them off. But if it was 92 feet to first base instead of 90, it was fair for everybody. They had 2 diamonds for baseball, I think. 2 diamonds for, or 1 diamond for softball. There was ladies softball in those years, and that was at the time when the ball had the out-seam. This was before your time, I'm sure, but the softball used to have an out-seam instead of an in-seam, so it was big seams around the thing. Anyway, and they did have a diamond for junior ball, and they pounded up a place to sell hot dogs. I guess they had hot dogs and chocolate bars and all that sort of thing. I guess they had pie for ice cream. They had ice cream. They brought it out on the train in insulated barrels. And they had a sports day.
Do you know what year this would have been happening in, roughly?
Well, they had 4 of them in the 30s, and probably around 1934, 35 for the first one. I'm not sure what year for sure. And according to the paper, they had 800 people show up at that sports day. It was a huge success. And you just wonder how many Model Ts it would take to bring all those people. Anyway.
8 and 6 women. They had 12 men's teams and 6 women's teams came to that first, so they had a great day.
I don't know how many, but there were some junior baseball teams as well. Anyway, they had 4 of those sports days. They moved to a different stubble field every year. Copeland's for the 2nd year, and I can't remember the other ones. And they were all successful, and the rink was built. And when they built the rink...
Now, what do you mean by building the rink? What did they do?
They had to clean off an area. They scrubbed off the scrub and stuff like that, and they leveled it as best they could. And they put up an 8-foot wall. It was an outdoor rink. They put up an 8-foot wall, and they reasoned that because it was down in the valley like that, and in the bush and beside the river, that they wouldn't have the trouble the railway had with snow. Like the only snow they would have is what fell straight down, not what drifted in. And I think they were right about that. So they weren't too concerned about it being a little on the large side because they thought they could handle the snow. And they weren't concerned about it being on the large side for lack of water because they thought they'd have a well, which they didn't turn out to be. But they did have the river. Anyway, they had what the largest sheet of ice I think there was around. The only sheet that I know of that was larger was at Brandon. The sheet was 180 feet long and 80 feet wide. And Brandon was 200, I think, in length. But most of the rinks we played on were 150 feet or something like that. They varied. Anyway, they flooded the rink. They got it going. The first year, they still hadn't dug their well. And they actually hauled the water up from the river with horses and team and barrels on stone boats. And they had a bucket on the end of a fork handle, cut a hole in the ice and dipped the water out and filled the barrel. And then drove up and tipped the barrels out onto the rink, went back down and got another load. And of course, if you have enough horses and stone boats and fork handles and pails, you get the job done. But they got it done, and it was a good sheet of ice. And the other interesting thing that I'm sure they didn't plan on, but it was very good ice. River water was very made very hard ice, whereas a lot of the rinks around were flooded with salty water, which didn't make very good ice. So
Well, that's fascinating. I had never even thought of that concept.
it was quite a difference. Like some of the rinks that we played on, outside rinks with well water, it really was almost too cold a day to be out there before you had good ice. A nice sunny day and nice warm afternoon, the ice would be quite soft. Yeah. Anyway, the rink during the 30s, the late 30s, it was a busy place. There was they had skating Monday evening. They got a lighting plant the second year. Of course, they were making money with sports days, you know. They got a lighting plant for the second year and got lights in there. They had skating on Monday, hockey practice Tuesday night, skating again Wednesday night, hockey practice again Thursday night. Friday was an off day because there was a dance someplace around on Friday. One in Bunclody one week, down at Riverside or Lily the next, or Fairfax, and they alternated. And then Saturday was hockey in the afternoon or skating, and skating again at night. Never on Sunday. It was a strict adherence to the Sabbath rules in those years. And going back to the sports day, I have a theory, I might be mistaken, but I think they held it on Saturday, which was a good day, because they didn't have a dance at night and didn't need to worry about the dance going into the next day. Other sports days, they had them at Minto, and they had them at Carroll, they had them at Elgin, Nesbitt. Every community had a sports day. But they had them on Friday, I think, because of the dance that night, so they could dance on into the morning. And I think the reason they got 800 people was Saturday just was a better day. Kids were out of school, the families could come, and it just worked. Yeah. But it was interesting. The rink didn't last that long, maybe 10 years or a little longer than that, I guess. But in the middle 30s, the school was full of kids. It was built for 32, and at one time there were 35 registered, I think, and this was during the 30s. In the middle or later 40s, they were down to 4. And
Okay, so what happened?
Well, the war came along, and the young people found jobs or went into military service, and that forced larger farms, because a lot of people left the farm and they couldn't get help. And when everything kind of shaped back up, it's just a whole different community. Yeah, different across the West, but it was different there too. Yeah. The school recovered to some degree, but the community never was the focus had moved away. The railway was gone, and yeah, we were hauling our grain elsewhere, and people were beginning, and then the larger school areas came in, and that, yeah, changed it.
Let's just talk a little bit, because I'm kind of fascinated with these bridges that needed to be for the Great Northern, and of course you needed another bridge for the traffic to cross, as that was the main road into Brandon back at one time also, right? So the first bridge that the Great Northern would have come to was right near the town of Bunclody, right? Where it went over the road?
It went the bridge at Bunclody, the railway bridge. They were a while, the Great Northern engineers were a while finding an appropriate place to cross the river, across the valley. I guess the river wasn't the problem, the valley was. And they had to get from the level and a grade down to an appropriate level to cross the river, and then back up onto the level on the other side. And they looked at several sites and eventually settled at Bunclody because they could come into the valley coming north from Minto and hit the valley, and the valley there runs to a northwest direction. And they got into the side of it and just gradually went down the side of the valley wall till they got down to the level they wanted. And in so doing, of course, they had to cross the Petemer ravine and another ravine up right close to Bunclody. The bridge was 83 feet above the water, from the track to the water.
Yeah, the big railroad bridge is 430 feet long. It was very, very scary to walk over because the river was down underneath.
Because was there a supports that went over the bridge or no?
No.
Open air.
Just open air. And you look down and made you very dizzy, but you see the water moving down in underneath between the ties. But it was huge, big, and the water tank was up there too, Alan, wasn't it?
On the north, they pumped the water from the river up into the tank, and the tank was up on the north side of the river. Just
So why on the north side? Do you know of the reason?
That I don't know. I suppose it just suited their purpose. I don't know. Yeah. Initially, back in the very early days of the settlement, there was a ferry right there. Between the railroad bridge was the furthest one west upstream, and the traffic bridge would be half a mile, would it be? Or would it be quite that far? Further downstream. And just more or less in between that, at one time there was a ferry. The ferry was, I think, just a huge raft, tied to both banks with a rope, and I don't know what. We managed to get across there. And then there were, of course, several places they could ford the river when the water was reasonable level. Yeah.
Can you give, just so we have it for history, your knowledge that you've gained on how that trestle bridge would have been erected to actually cross the Souris River for the train? Like how were this, where you initially leave the land, how was that reinforced to help hold?
Well, they built dirt abutments out, and what they did when they built those abutments, and they did the same thing when they crossed the ravines, they put, I suppose, a flimsy trestle bridge in there first, and then they put tracks on that, and then they could run rail cars out on there, or cars, and dump the dirt down through. So the bridge stayed in there. There's a bridge in underneath those fields, apparently, if it hasn't long since rotted away. And I guess they did the same thing where the railway bridge crossed. They built dirt abutments out on both sides, and then filled in between with them.
And that was the best idea they could come up to help reinforce that part of the bridge, right? Because that would be the purpose of dumping the dirt.
The actual bridge, they brought piles into Carroll. The railway was already into Carroll, and they brought them in. They were 90 feet long, brought them from BC, and then they pounded those down in, and then set the bridge on the top of that. And I don't really know much about how the construction that was done back in 1990 time, before I was born by quite a while.
So did that offer employment in the area, or did the crew just keep moving along?
Oh yeah, I think there was a lot of employment in the area. They would have had their foremen, their engineers and so on with them, but yeah, a lot of the local work was done. Or the work was done locally, and that applied to the roadbed. They hired local horses and those sorts of things to haul the dirt up and shape it and put the track on all the way from Boisevane up. Yeah.
And I've read in your history about how the bridge that was used for the traffic to cross, actually half of it fell down one night, did it not?
The ice took the original bridges out once or twice. I'm not sure how many times. And the first ones, they were overhead bridges. They had an overhead trestle. Yeah. The one that's there now doesn't. It's a concrete bridge. And it's been there since, how long? 40, 50 years, I guess. I don't know.
They had to build they had to build the last one when the machinery got bigger, and it had to move from one side of the road to the other, and so they had to build this much wider bridge, and even yet some of the things that go over have to be up over the edges, but it's a much wider bridge.
Down as low as they can so that they can elevate the machine higher than that, or to get across there. It's the only bridge across the river between Souris and the one at Riverside. And so it's out, and the park and the village, when it was there, was nicely situated because all kinds of folks came down through that way on their way to Brandon. And so in latter years, I would go into Brandon to do business, and the person would say to me, "Oh, yes, I know where Bunclody is. I used to go through there with my dad years ago," that sort of thing. The other thing that happened, thanks to Vince Dodds, they'd occasionally say, "You mean there really is a Bunclody?" They thought it was all Dodds' imagination.
But there was no marching band, right?
No marching band.
So you have some really unique memories of that area, and you like to study the history. Is there anything that stands out in your mind in particular about that area, though?
Well, just thinking back over it, I thought, you know, I don't know for why, but over the years they've had a kind of a flair for doing things. The community, I'm sure, was just like countless other communities across in many, many ways. But they did have a flair for doing things a little differently. Sometimes
Friendly community. We always thought of it being a very, very friendly community. New people were always welcomed so much to come into the community, and it's special, of course, in our hearts. Probably everybody community is special in that. It's me. We moved in Brandon 3 years ago, but we always said Bunclody will all remain home. No, we was there for so long. I was away for 4 years in Ottawa during the war and so on. But and I went to Vancouver. But by the time I came home from my holidays in Vancouver, and was from the Air Force. Of course, we were kids going to school together there. So that made it rather special too. So instead of going back to Vancouver to train for nurse, we were married in 1946. So
Married at Bunclody then, or?
no, we started out Bunclody. We were married Brandon, so I must say there's no church there then. So no, we're married.
we had to force him to part of that here, but remember, man, yeah. But go ahead.
I was wondering about our marriage was put on the jury duties before, and he complained about it and said how he get off this, and he couldn't. If it's trust going on during the chair wedding, that's what happened or something.
You're over to you.
Never did.
It was only you have any mention of Bunclody?
The fact that we were very grateful to go up and buy and from others and parents. The same thing. It's be a special community as far as we were concerned, and it will always seem to be home for us. Even though I still go back to the Willing Workers meetings whenever I can from Brandon, which isn't that far. But and these particular times and the special community suppers that we have at Christmas time, and the picnic in the park in the summer are very special for us. And that's where we were very sorry to miss the picnic this year, but it couldn't be helped. I think probably the first picnic that either of us had ever missed. But no, Bunclody will always remain a very special place in our lives, I think so.
We had great times during the 30s, sleigh riding, you know, as kids and that sort of thing. But I tried to take my family down the hill one day on a sleigh in latter years, and told them how wonderful it was and so on. But, you know, with the gravel stones and one thing, the sleigh doesn't slide anymore. It didn't work the way it used to.
I found it fascinating in your history book where I read about how they used to use a ladder as a sleigh. I thought that was sure a unique idea.
Some of them used pie plates.
I know there's one family, their house was sort of built on the side of a hill, and there was always a pie plate at the door. And when we would go out the door, and their well was further down the hill, we could get on that pie plate and go sliding down to their well. And then water would be brought up in this particular home, and there was always a bit of water spilled all the way up the path, so it became quite icy. But my sister and I, we had a wonderful time, and as I say, our own particular farm growing up was in the valley. And we used shovels, and we would go down to the hills, and we'd sit on the shovel and start down the hill, and the shovel would invariably turn round and round and round. And it was just delightful. When it was supper time and we knew we were supposed to be coming home, we would hate to come in. I remember that particularly. That was just a great time. And our picnics at the river, one of the other things that the Bunclody community were known for years was we met at one part of the river. We called it Mr. Lebeder's. He was one of the old-time men down there, and he had a little house down by this particular spot in the river, and the community would gather there for the Sunday picnics. And he had a big raft out in the middle of the river, and I remember his bathing suit was a pair of brace overalls, and he'd be out on the raft directing traffic. We could take the car. The river was fairly low in those years. The car would just drive right through the river up the other side. Sometimes we'd get stuck, and the young fellows would be out there pushing the car back up. And those picnics were delightful. The community met there. You know, that was part of our growing up years when we were kids. that the community would meet at the river, and it would be our Sunday picnic. So, and I'm sure other communities do the same thing, but those things live in your memory, you know. Ball games down there, and just lots of fun. Good feeling, very friendly people. So.
Well, what more can I say than thank you for sharing your memories. Some of our younger crowd that's been at our picnic here, can you guys tell me your name?
Micah.
Michael, what's your last name?
14.
And how old are you?
7.
Whereabouts do you live?
Close to Surrey.
Close to Surrey. And do you come down here to the picnic each year?
Yep.
Do you like playing baseball?
Yep.
Yeah. And what's your name?
Tiffany.
Tiffany what? What's your last name?
Stuart.
Stuart. And where do you live?
Just up the hill.
Oh, you live very close here. Oh, good. What's your name?
Dane.
What's your last name?
Watson.
Do you live near here?
We live close to Surrey too.
Yeah. Oh, that's your brother. Oh, and your name?
Jessica.
Jessica. What's your last name?
Stuart.
Oh, you guys are sisters. Did you win the baseball game?
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me your name.
Whitney Fortin.
And where do you live, Whitney?
I live close to Surrey too.
Do ya?
They all live together.
Are you guys all related? Eh? Not quite?
That's Callum. Not us. Not us.
Okay.
You didn't say how old you were.
How old are you, honey?
I'm 8 and a half. I'm going to be 9 in October.
Pretty soon.
I didn't say
I'm
my
10.
age.
10. How old are you?
6.
Oh, good
Can
news.
I tell you my birthday?
Sure.
My birthday was in April 25th.
Ah, so you got to wait quite a while yet.
Mm-hmm.
But have you guys all had fun at this picnic today?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And do you think you'll come back next year?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, that's pretty good news.
The best part I've ever had at this picnic was getting candy.
Oh, you get candy at this picnic.
My favorite part was baseball.
Baseball. Do you have a favorite part? There.
Reading. I have a favorite part.
What's your favorite part?
I don't have a favorite part.
You don't? Did you just get bubble gum at the candy hunt, though? That's how come everybody's chewing gum. Well, everyone, you can see this is a pretty grand time down here at Bunclody. And we'd like to thank everyone that took part in this today with us. And we wish everyone all the best of luck. This is Sandra Racine and E.T. signing off from the Bunclody Picnic.